First memories of feeling different, probably very early actually. I'd say when I was 3, I felt a little bit different to other kids. It became more prominent the older I got. I didn't really understand the gender roles the way I was supposed to. Particularly when you're playing doctors and things like that with other kids. I always wanted to be the nurse. I didn't want to be the doctor, because doctors were men back then, they weren't women. And so I always chose instinctively the female roles in these role play scenarios that children get involved in. And it was uncomfortable because it was quite natural for me to choose the female gender roles. But the other kids were always like, why do you want to do that? Like, you know, they basically, they saw me as a boy, but I didn't see myself as a boy. I saw myself as me. And it wasn't necessarily dictated by a physical gender as such. But as I got a little older, I started to realise that that identity that I had was actually a female identity. And I remember one morning in primary school, getting ready for school, I decided to dress in my sister's tunic rather than my shorts and shirt. Much to my father's horror, of course. He certainly didn't want any, I'm not going to use his words, he didn't want any gender diverse people in the family. And it was pretty clear that I wasn't to do that again. And so what I had to do when I went to school was be aware of where I was, who I was with, and how I was acting. And that sounds weird because you think, well, as children you're not acting. Well, actually you are. You are always behaving in a way that's expected. And people probably aren't aware of it because, you know, they're not transgender. We are constantly vigilant about who we are with, where we are, and how we appear. And we moderate our behaviour in order to avoid detection, in order to avoid violence, in order to avoid inappropriate circumstances that may or may not be harmful to someone. It's rare these days in Australia for a transgender person to experience violence as a result of their identity. But when I was young, it was quite common because there wasn't many transgender people. Back then the word transsexual was used more often than transgender. So I was working. After I left university, I became a dancer. I was working in cabaret shows with female dancers, and I looked like a female with small breasts. I was quite thin, and, basically I got by. People thought I was a female. And I managed to get a contract to travel Asia and dance in a couple of different cabaret shows, in the big, large resort hotels, this sort of thing. I loved dancing. It was beautiful, and we wore beautiful clothing, and it was such a release for me to have such a wonderful experience being a beautiful woman on stage with other women, dancing in these fabulous costumes and wearing feathers, and it was a dream come true. This particular contract I got from a company required me to work at the Peninsula Hotel in Singapore as our first stop, and then go on to various hotels throughout Asia for a year. It was very exciting and a wonderful way to earn money, and I was going to save for my sex change operation. I entered customs in Singapore with a passport that had male, not female, but I looked like a female. I was arrested, put in incarceration, because I'd broken a Singaporean law that I didn't know anything about, and my agent and the show manager obviously didn't know anything about either. But back then, I'm not sure about now, but back then you could not be one sex and appear to be the other sex. It was illegal. You were considered a transvestite or something perverse like that. And consequently, I had to be placed under house arrest. They decided not to put me in prison because it may attract some negative press from the Australian government, or some negative reaction from the Australian government and the Australian press. So they decided to put me under house arrest during my contractual stay in the country, which was 1 month. I worked in the dressing room, and wherever I went I had 2 Singaporean police officers accompany me. I was not even allowed to go anywhere except the bathroom without them. And I was told I had to use the male bathroom, which was ridiculous because most of the men were shocked when I went into the male bathroom. I didn't look like a man anymore. I was very much a woman, except for one small appendage between my legs, which I planned on rectifying as soon as I could. That was a very difficult trip for me. It was humiliating. I felt violated, and I was concerned all the time for my safety because police in Singapore had a reputation, and I'd seen it myself, of how they would beat transgender people with nightsticks to the ground. I saw that happen twice. It was very upsetting, and I remember I went to help one girl that I saw, but the police that I were with held me back and told me that I had no right to interfere in Singaporean policing. It was very upsetting. I reached out to the Australian Embassy to tell them my situation. We'll get back to you. They never did. They didn't care about me. They didn't care about any transgender people back then. As I said, I've known many transgender people in my life, and both ways, male to female and female to male, and we're all got a common base. We're born one sex, and we know we are a different sex. And so our life journey is about finding ourselves through a transition. Most transgender people have the desire to be accepted. Now, that's very hard to do. General society can be accepting, providing you look like everybody else in general society. Most transgender people don't find complete acceptance in general society, but they do find acceptance in their community, in the LGBTQI community, and that is important to have some support and acceptance. But I really think that everybody needs to accept diverse genders of all people. At the end of the day, we're all the same. We might look a little bit different, we might have a little bit of a different idea about things, but we're all people and we're all in this together and we're all going in the same direction. That is, from birth to death. So we have a common interest. Why not experience life together in an open-minded way? That would be fabulous if we could do that. The real-world situation is very different, of course. For example, US politics and Donald Trump has declared that there's only male and female. Now, America's never been a very accommodating and accepting place for transgender people, but they did have some gender rights, transgender rights. Now they've been erased and basically put the program of transgender people in the US back at least 30 years. Transgender people in America now are in risk of violence, in risk of not being able to get work, not being able to live their lives. It's basically a very demeaning, and in a way it's a little bit like Germany in 1938 when Hitler declared that Jews were no longer citizens. Well, Trump has pretty much declared that transgender people are no longer people unless they obey what the government says, which is you're either male or female. And when they mean that, they don't mean that you can become a complete female. They mean you have to be the sex at your birth. And if you have changed your sex and got a new birth certificate, they're erasing that. You have to have your original birth certificate. And if you have a passport in a new name and new gender, now that is obsolete. They'll issue a new one in your birth name and your birth sex. If that ever comes to Australia or Europe or the UK, it would be a terrible disaster, taking humanity backwards hundreds of years. Unfortunately, the world is changing again. We're seeing more anti-trans things happening with trans teens particularly, who really are a very vulnerable group of people. The young children who want some sort of treatment for their gender dysphoria, yet politicians debating whether or not to help them. They consider maybe some therapy, but they're not willing to give puberty blockers or hormones because they may change their mind. I think most children actually know better about who they are than adults do. Adults are the ones that get hung up after years of repression. Children are more in touch with their true selves. So I tend to say, why not let the child decide? Obviously, the child isn't going to choose a medical situation if it's not necessary. Nobody wants to have to take needles and do all sorts of things just in order to be themselves. Especially children are afraid of such things. But our politicians have decided otherwise. I hope it doesn't change for the negative, but the world, particularly guided by the Americans in all their wisdom, is taking a very retrograde direction in terms of trans rights, and I hate to see that happen to Australia and to other countries as well.
Mijn naam is Manuel Diaz. Ik woon in Amsterdam. Ik ben een transman. Ik heb een Joodse achtergrond van moederskant. En ik ben een boeddhist. Jaren geleden ben ik, misschien wel 30 jaar geleden, ben ik begonnen met boeddhisme. Toen was het nog geen hype. En ik vond daar mijn pad en ik vond ook mijn leraar daar, maar daar vertel ik straks meer over. Ik ben geboren in Amsterdam en getogen. Ik hou van mijn stad en we filmen nu in de buurt waar ik ben grootgebracht. Het was een mooie tijd. Ik was zowel een verlegen kind, maar ook een brutaal kind. Het hing een beetje vanaf welke jaren het was. Dus op school was ik soms heel verlegen, maar privé was ik dan weer heel brutaal. Ging ik overal naartoe. Soms zag ik eruit als een klein meisje, maar ik was ook wel een brutaal jongetje. En dan voelde ik me heel vrij. Dus vroeger gingen we naar de camping, dan hadden we een huisje met mijn ouders en mijn broer. En daar ravotte ik speelde daar en ik voelde me echt een heel vrij kind. En dat is jaren later is dat ook weer teruggekomen. Ik werd steeds sterker in mezelf, zelfverzekerd, ook wel een beetje brutaal. Ik vond het heerlijk om mijn eigen weg te gaan. Dat ben ik eigenlijk. Mijn kinderjaren waren, aan de ene kant was ik heel vrij, maar aan de andere kant had ik veel lichamelijke klachten. Het ging niet altijd lichamelijk goed. Ik moest vaak naar het ziekenhuis. Maar ik heb toch mijn weg gevonden. Ik ging altijd mijn eigen gang. Ging soms naar andere delen van de stad. Dan had je de Chinese buurt. Daar liep ik dan in mijn eentje rond en keek mijn ogen uit als een soort Alice in Wonderland. Nou, ik kwam erachter dat ik eigenlijk meisjes wel leuk vond. En dan had je hier het COC. En daar mocht je pas in als je 18 werd. Dus op het moment dat ik 18 werd, toen had ik het gevoel van, nu ga ik naar het COC. Dus ik kwam allemaal bij al die lesbische vrouwen. Een wereld ging voor me open. Ik vond het echt geweldig. Ik was heel actief, werd ik. Ik ging naar demonstraties. Ik ging naar evenementen, cafés. En ik had een geweldige tijd. Maar op een gegeven moment knaagde er iets. Dus ik voelde, dat was jaren daarna, had ik het gevoel van, ja, maar ik weet eigenlijk niet of ik een meisje ben, vrouw ben. Dus ik ontmoette een aantal andere mensen in de lesbische scene. En die hadden allemaal een beetje hetzelfde gevoel. Toen zijn we, tijdens een evenement een mannen drag workshops gaan organiseren. En toen gingen we allemaal in herenkleding. En daarvoor was ik er al een beetje mee begonnen. Ik voelde me gewoon heel fijn om in 3-delig pak rond te lopen, zelfs naar mijn werk. Maar op een gegeven moment wilde ik meer. Dus ik ging het aan mijn ouders vertellen. Maar dat was natuurlijk heel moeilijk, want eerst kwam ik oud als lesbo en later als transjongen. Dat kostte toch nog heel veel tijd voordat ik zelf verder wilde gaan met lichamelijke transitie. Maar eerst wilde ik mezelf verder ontdekken. Dus ik heb een Joodse achtergrond. Dus ik ging mijn Joodse achtergrond helemaal verder ontdekken. Wat is de geschiedenis van de familie? Hoe zit het met die familie? We hebben familieleden, ooms en tantes van mijn moeder hebben de Tweede Wereldoorlog meegemaakt. Zijn ook vermoord in een kamp. Mijn opa van moeders kant is wel teruggekomen. Maar die is depressief teruggekomen uit de oorlog. Maar deze opa was voor mij een soort voorbeeld. Als zeg maar een soort padres de familias. Dus iemand die heel tot de verbeelding sprak. Zo'n Joodse opa die de Tweede Wereldoorlog heeft meegemaakt. Ook zijn geschiedenis was voor mij heel belangrijk. Toen ik dat allemaal had uitgezocht, toen ontmoette ik een boeddhistische leraar. En toen ben ik het boeddhistische pad opgegaan. Heel veel gemediteerd, retraits gedaan. En mijn Joodse achtergrond plus mijn boeddhistisch pad, dat viel eigenlijk samen. En dat waren eigenlijk prachtige cadeaus. Ik ging mezelf verder ontwikkelen. En ik wilde ook uitzoeken wat voor man, want inmiddels was ik er wel achter dat ik en op vrouw viel, maar ook me meer een jongen voelde. Dus ik ben met het spirituele pad verder gegaan. Met mijn leraar heb ik contact mee gehad. Hij heeft me helemaal geholpen op het spirituele boeddhistische pad. Ik voelde me steeds meer krachtiger worden. Toen ben ik op een gegeven moment naar de synagoge gegaan, heb een keppel opgedaan. En vanaf dat moment heb ik het gevoel gehad dat mijn opa mij accepteerde als kleinzoon. Daarna ben ik met mijn boeddhistische leraar gaan praten. En toen heb ik gezegd, nu is het tijd dat ik ook verder wil met mijn transitie. Ik ben in retraite gegaan. Ik heb verschillende operaties gehad. En ik kwam steeds sterker in mijn man zijn. En dat voelde echt heel fijn. En toen heb ik Trans Amsterdam opgezet. We hebben toen met Trans Amsterdam de eerste Trans Pride in 2014 opgezet. En dat was echt een mijlpaal. We hebben dat echt heel groots opgezet. We hebben dat 5 jaar lang achter elkaar gedaan. Met forumdiscussies, met pubquiz, maar ook muziekevenementen. We hebben gesproken over hoe het is om een transman te zijn, hoe het is om een transvrouw te zijn. Dus het hele scala van alle trans thema's kwamen aan bod. Ook internationale transpersonen kwamen naar Nederland. Toen hebben we het, na 5 jaar hebben we gezegd, nou het wordt ons toch een beetje veel. Dus wij gaan over het hele jaar gaan we voor Trans Amsterdam evenementen organiseren. Toen hebben we een Trans Art School opgezet, omdat we ons wilden gaan richten op talentontwikkeling voor transpersonen. En vorig jaar bestonden we dus 10 jaar. En dat was echt geweldig. Er kwamen internationale gasten. Mensen van vroeger kwamen allemaal langs. Er waren prachtige artiesten die optraden. Het was gewoon één groot feest. En ja, ik ben eigenlijk heel trots dat ik het heb opgezet. En ook trots op ons hele team en mensen die vroeger bij ons kwamen en die nu nog werken. En wat we merken dat het meer dan ooit nodig is, dat we in deze tijd samen zijn, ons vasthouden, maar ook laten zien wie we zijn. Want het zijn hele zware periodes voor transpersonen. We worden uitgescholden, we worden gediscrimineerd. Eigenlijk ze doen, heel veel regeringen over de wereld doen net of transpersonen niet meer bestaan. Of worden uitgesloten van allerlei belangrijke dingen. Dus daarom is het echt belangrijk dat we als Trans Amsterdam doorgaan met de strijd.
I think the moments that led up to me questioning my gender identity was that I didn't necessarily know the vocabulary. I didn't know how to ask those questions. What I knew was that things didn't feel right. And I think when it came to my personal story, it's that idea that, like, the cliches between male and female, whereas guys would like trucks and girls would like fairies and mermaids and all of that stuff. And knowing that I didn't fit in with the stereotypical male young people of the era, knowing that I didn't necessarily have the vocabulary to even comprehend questioning something else. Of course, your parents always want the best for you, and your teachers think they know what is best for you, and you kind of go with the flow when you don't really know what's going on. It's better to do what is normal than what is necessarily comfortable. And I think that feeling of just heavy emotion of being confused and repressed kind of led this idea that things really weren't as they seemed. It wasn't a feeling of being uncomfortable, but more of an element of feeling distressed. And I think from my personal understanding of those early years of my transition really come from that understanding of just being frustrated all of the time about anything that didn't feel right. And in my case, anything that was ever so slightly more masculine caused so much pain. And it wasn't a physical pain, but almost like a war in my own mind, this battle that was just there. It was a battle of my own self. And I think there was elements in that just really enhanced that emotion. The primary challenges that I faced were a mixture of both internal and external. To some degrees, it was in appearance, and sometimes it was the social challenge of people comprehending it themselves, people who were not part of my family, people who didn't live in my close circles. It was having to tell my peers, having to tell my teachers, having that sort of lack of vocabulary, but still trying to explain it in a way that made sense. I think it's so easy to just be like, oh, I have a boy's body and a girl's mind. And in those early days, that kind of made sense. And as I've got older, as I've been transitioning for a very long time now, it's that understanding that it's so much more complicated than that. I think in those early days, it was just chuck out anything that just was logical but there wasn't really enough research to back it up with anything that was factual. And I think nowadays it's a lot more easier for people to comprehend what being trans is. Whereas in the early 2000s, it wasn't a quip of a politician. It wasn't something that was on social media because social media didn't exist. And I think it was that which really made it a lot more challenging to get the concept across to people, because there was so little understanding of what being trans meant. I think the things that gave me courage was the factor of the confidence that I got from myself. There's that element where if you know something is wrong and you know what helps that feeling get suppressed and basically make you feel that joy, that ability to feel that you want to live, it's chasing that and knowing that happiness is an end goal of a goalpost that is forever moving, and chasing that as best you can. And if it means that people are going to be weird around you, so be it. Knowing that you can finally be you and not have a war in your own mind. I think it's so important for trans people of the era to really have just embraced who they were. And so many others, like myself, many young people in the early 2000s, there was a collected community. Very few young people were out as trans. And a lot of us had to stick together. And it was that idea of unity and not realizing that I was alone anymore that made it a lot easier to overcome any challenges. For my personal journey, there wasn't really any surprising factors. I guess there was the benefit that I was so early that I think people who knew me already knew something wasn't quite right. I think when I think about my peers at school, although there was very few, I don't think anyone necessarily was like, wow, that's a shocker. I think people kind of just embraced me for who I was. And I'm very lucky that the family that I had were there and supportive of that. There wasn't really any negative opinions, and any opinions that were slightly more harsh were shielded by the strengths of my own family. They didn't let me see the negativity until I was old enough to really comprehend what that really meant. Knowing that there was nothing really stopping me, especially when it came to family and friends, meant that I was able to live quite a free and easy childhood. There wasn't really any mass hurdles. There wasn't really anything. I could just be me and do the things that any old teenager would want to do. I was very fortunate that I was part of a good theatre troupe in my early teenage years where there was a lot of diversity naturally. And I know it's cliche to say that hanging out with theatre kids, there is going to be dyed hair and pronouns and everyone's part of the alphabet mafia. And as much as it's half true, it was that idea that I was in a nice, warm, protective bubble and I didn't really have to face the outer world. And I was so fortunate that I could just stay true to myself and really just keep going at life and trying to flourish in the things that made me happy and the things that I was interested in. All the hobbies, from making videos to hang out with friends. My life was pretty easy. Right now in the world, it seems like, for the most part, you can be gay and it's okay. Yeah, there's some countries that have very horrendous punishments for being gay. And I'm sure they have even worse policies for those who identify as transgender, if they even recognize it, So there is an element where I feel right now that we're in a weird space being trans. And I think when you're used as a political tool for those in power to get into more power, it definitely is disheartening. And it's definitely a challenge that really isn't something that's new. This has been the last 50 years. It's been the last 100 years. I think there's been so many minorities and equality battles over the entire span of the human race. It's not just about being trans. It's not just about being gay. It's not even about having women's rights to vote or even if your skin color is different and having equal opportunities. Equality and their fights have been going on for decades and for centuries. There are some politicians who absolutely refuse to recognize trans identities. And I think if there really was going to be change, you've got to talk to the ones in power. It's only so good making a TikTok and sharing your story. It's only so good posting to your friends on Instagram of how far I've come. I think the problem is there isn't a lot of spaces now to talk. Everywhere seems to be repressing the trans community. May it be Facebook removing their policies protecting LGBT individuals. May it be X now being owned by Elon Musk. I think the platforms are suppressing us, so we have to take action into our own hands. Not inciting a riot, but I think there is an element where the approach has to change right now. There is a fundamental flaw with doing pride events in the sense that if you do it in the wrong area and in the wrong way, it's going to be seen as a protest, as a riot, and it will only harm the image of the trans community further. I think prides are amazing. I think they're great, but it really has to be done in the right way. I think there's a problem with, some members of the trans community who have been fortunate enough to get a platform, and they may not be able to use their voice because they're scared that they will lose an audience if they start talking out in a negative way towards some big names in the world. It's unfortunate that right now in the trans community, it's hard to be out and proud. It's hard to be heard when everyone's suppressing who you are. The only real action as an individual of the trans community can make right now is to stay hopeful, as they've always have been, to keep that fire ignited in their hearts and souls, and really believe in the shared goal of freedom eventually will happen. What that exact action needs to be done, it isn't just one singular thing. I think we're talking multiple of years, multiple of steps, and it all starts with being yourself. I think the one takeaway from this would really be the factor of understanding that it's okay to be whatever you want to be. If you want to transition, then that's fine. If you don't want to transition, then that's fine. If you're someone who isn't part of the trans community or isn't feeling these thoughts of changing gender, try to listen to the ones who are. Try and really get and understand their stories. Because the first step of making change is to listen.
One, two, three, four. Staying up till 2:30, lying there across the room. I'm going crazy without you now. We can talk about something strange. We both know that's part of the game, and it's so hazy at this hour. I couldn't figure out why you stuck around. Fall with me, baby. I know it feels sure, it's good to get a kiss, but the best part is that risk, wondering if maybe we've got it all. and I know my love is true. What I'd give to be back in that room when we were running out of things to say. I couldn't fall asleep with you in the same room as me. Fall with me, baby. I know it feels shaky. Staying up till 2:30, lying there across the room. I'm going crazy without you now.
Hi, I'm Rylan. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm a comedian based in the city. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, which was very interesting growing up as a queer kid. Um, for me, growing up, I did not identify as a trans woman, so I didn't have the troubles of that in the society that I was in, but I definitely grew up as just like a little gay boy, um, which was interesting and like hard and not the easiest thing to do. And I think because of like those struggles, I kind of like knew in my head that I wanted to wait to whatever my journey was until I got out of that city. Um, and I also just didn't know. I think there are some trans women who like always knew like they're a woman or they're a girl. And for me, I just always felt like disconnected from my body and like disconnected from my mind. I kind of in a way thought I was like a homophobic gay boy because I didn't like other gay boys. I was like, what's going on? Like, this is weird. And when I moved to New York and like just got to be around other people, other trans people, other queer people, I kind of was like, okay, wait a minute. Like, this actually makes more sense. It kind of is like something that clicks in your brain. You're like, wait, okay, this is like who I am. This is what I was supposed to be born as. I think some people think like we make the choice, but honestly, I feel like the choice kind of like found me. Like when I realized it, when it clicked in my brain, I was like, oh, well, yeah, this just makes sense. And interestingly enough, I feel like growing up in Nebraska in such like a small place and closed-minded place, also grew up in a Black household who definitely like we were at church every Sunday. If you didn't go to church, you couldn't live there. Um, there's just not much knowledge, and there's not much room for people to like I don't know for people to really be open enough to try to embrace you as a young person to be like, oh, I see that you're different, and so let me like come and talk to you and try to help you. Um, and so because of that, I always was just like quiet and shy and didn't really like do the work until like I left. I would say from a very young age, I like kind of was questioning my gender. I don't think like I knew what I was doing at the time, but I definitely like as a kid was playing with Barbies and like dancing and like watching High School Musical and Cheetah Girls and different things like that. Like I never was like I want to watch football or play a sport. And excuse me. And growing up with a single father, my dad was like, "Oh, you gotta be like sporty and be a boy." Um, so for me, I think like moments that like led to me beginning to question my gender started like young, just started so young that I didn't really like grasp it at the time. Um, but I think certain moments came from like negative comments from people being like, "Oh, like act like a boy," or like, "Why are you playing with Barbies?" Like it was always moments of like people honestly kind of like attacking me where I started to be like questioning my gender. Like I didn't know I wasn't acting like a boy, and what kid would know that? To be quite honest, I feel like it was other people telling me like, "Oh, you're acting weird, or you're not acting like a boy," and so I think that's when I actually began to question my gender. Because funny enough, I don't think I would have questioned my gender, my sexual preferences until like later, much later on in life, other people noticed it. And I think that actually is so universal. A lot of us face that. A lot of people are calling us names before we even know what the names mean. Um, I'm gonna say like maybe like sixth grade was when I was like, oh, okay, I'm different. I was going to an all boys school. Everybody wore Jordans and played basketball, and I was like just the odd one out. And I think that's when I really was beginning to question my gender. And then like life happened, and you kind of forget a little bit, or not forget, but you suppress it, and you get to be who you are. And started questioning it again in my early 20s. I feel like I feel like when I came out, it was in the height of COVID, like 20. Actually, oh my God, I think I came out as transgender in 2020, not 2021. And I just remember like external challenges that I really really faced were like all they were kind of like all at work, which is crazy, which I think a lot of people face that. I don't know if I navigated it correctly. I feel like all I could do was tell my boss. Um, but it's such an interesting thing to navigate because no one typically is really on our side. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. And so I feel like I didn't navigate it properly, to be quite honest. And a lot of the like challenges that I've faced has been like work wise, which is such a big topic. I, a lot of trans people face unemployment because it is so difficult for trans people to get jobs. There's such a bias on trans people when it comes to work. There are so many, which is why crowdfunding is so important and amazing, and mutual aid is so important. And so I'm such an advocate for mutual aid because, you know, trans getting a job in general is hard, but like they're really, really, really not hiring the dolls. And I faced a lot of like external challenges at work from coworkers when I came out. I had a coworker who said that I like hit her, and then I went back to the office, and then her story changed, and it just was like no one was on my side. Um, and honestly, like going through that and kind of facing a lot of challenges, the only way that you can really come out of it is like learn from whatever happened then and like move a little bit smarter in the future. I think for me, and then like always move safe. I think a lot of I also want to talk about another external challenges. I think hopefully this is a universal feeling, but when you start to transition, especially when you're transitioning into a little bit more film presenting, I noticed that I got a lot of more attention. And sometimes it was good attention, and a lot of times it was bad attention. And one of the biggest challenges I faced a lot is like the sexualization of trans women, and kind of like the people who felt like they can be in your space because of it. Trans women are women in general are so like disrespected, and people do not care that much about women, and then to be a trans woman it's even lower. So I faced a lot of just like unwarranted attention, especially being out. Physical harm, people like getting too close to me, people touching me. um and for that, I will say, coming like learning from that and coming out of that is such a hard thing. Like, you have to really protect yourself. But unfortunately, I have learned so much from those situations to the point where I've lost a little bit of, what's the word? And I lost a bit of just like a loss of a lot of privacy. Because when I realized like this is now my life and like I have to be more careful, like I would go dancing at the club and a guy would dance with me, and then like we're dancing and then we make out, and then like, oh, he didn't know you were trans, so then like you're in a like unsafe situation. I think coming out of that, I learned a few things safety wise. One, you never have privacy. Someone always knows where I'm at, unfortunately, which is kind of annoying to me sometimes. Like I share my location with so many people because of that. When I order an Uber or a Lyft, someone always gets a notification that I've ordered a car, just so that someone knows where I'm at all the time. I can't go out alone ever anymore unless maybe I'm going to a queer event, but then like still. So you lose a little bit of like those things that like people get to enjoy. Um, and then you just have to be like, I think coming out of it, I also really, really had to be super, super, super upfront and like blunt with people. Like I'll be out and someone will come up to me in any kind of situation. I'm just like, now I have to like out myself for my safety, but I'm also like, there's just certain situations where I'm like, leave me alone. I'm trans. But, I don't know. It doesn't always work like that. But for me, I've realized that like being super upfront and like blunt has gotten me out of a lot of sticky situations for sure. I don't know. I do think that people's minds can be opened up. I do think people can change, and I do think people can grow, and I've seen it. But I do think that it's up to them. Like we can't force people, and we can't. I don't think that the job and responsibility of educating people about trans people should all be placed on trans people's shoulders. Um, yeah, I think sometimes people have to go out and do the work. Growing up, I went to primarily white schools, and I wanted to learn about Black history. So I did the work. I went and sought out classes at a community college, and I signed myself up and I did the work while I was still in high school to make sure that I was learning about this specific topic. Um, like, yeah, I could have went and, talked to Black people and asked them to teach me the history, which is what I essentially did, but I paid for it and I sought it out to do it. And I just feel like there's so many ways you can learn about trans people, and there's so many ways that you can educate yourself without you having to sit in front of a trans person and be like, you tell me why you act like this and tell me why you feel like this. And I don't know. That's just kind of like, it's just kind of a lot of pressure for us, I feel like. I do think there are limits though to people's minds being open, because I feel like dating, I'm gonna incorporate dating into this, because when I've gone on dates with cis men, I think it's very important to always ask them how their family and friends are, because it doesn't matter how open that person is in private, in closed doors, in the four walls that we're in at the moment. When they step out of that, it's like, how are they going to treat you when you're not around? And so my limits are, I feel like, yeah, I can open up your minds, but are you going to do the work to open up the minds of the people around you? And are you also going to advocate for me and be an educated person on trans people when I'm not in the room with you? Or are you going to revert back to the way that you were before you entered my space? And a lot of times people go back to that, and people are ashamed of knowing trans people or being attracted to trans people, or anything really. And so I think that's a really strong like limit for a lot of people, is that they don't want other people to know how they view trans women or trans men. But I'm gonna speak for trans women as women. I feel like gender is such a hard topic to really like think about and talk about. And if you are someone who's struggling with it, I mean, I feel like my biggest piece of advice is to be super open to community. I think a lot of times it's really hard when you're kind of sad or depressed to find community, especially if you're not in a place where there's not a lot of people like you. But I think if I didn't have community, I would not be where I'm at today. Like I would not be able to know how to change my name or to change my gender marker or where to get laser hair removal. Like community is the biggest thing to me, because a lot of us don't have that family that we need, and so we have to build the community to like make new family members. I think a lot of times like the questions could be answered if you just had a sister, a trans doll friend, a trans girlfriend. Like just the community is such a big one for me. Like that is my biggest piece of advice. If you're exploring your gender, hit up a friend and ask them about it, talk to them about it, and just like kind of like don't be shy and ask them how their process went. I think there's nothing that I've done as a trans woman that another trans woman didn't tell me. Like I have just like learned from so many other dolls, and I'm so grateful for that. There's like eyes on us for some reason, and we've had so many people open doors to be hateful and disguise it as conversation, and then it leads to other people being hateful. You know, interestingly enough, as a comedian, I've done podcasts, I've done shows, and everyone always brings up Dave Chappelle to me. And I always say a few things. One, the thing that I love to tell people is that I'm a comedian first. And if it's funny, it's funny. Dave Chappelle just was not funny. That's neither here nor there. I also think that the problem that it comes from, one of my biggest problems with that, since people love to know my opinion on Dave Chappelle, one of my biggest problems of that is that, one, he's saying things that like he has no idea about. You can tell that he's never educated himself on it. He's never talked to a trans person about it. He's kind of just talking and rambling. And then two, people don't understand the outcome of what they're saying, and it has opened up so many doors for other people who hate us, maybe even more than him, to be super hateful to us. And I've seen it with so many other comedians, because now every single special that comes out on Netflix, the first 5 minutes of it is about trans people. So I think that we have to be a little bit more, I think that we have to be like realistic and say that we're under attack. And I think that we just need to like figure out ways to stay together and just be like, I don't know, a super close-knit big family and protect each other, truly.
We climb into bed. Got every intention of sleeping, but we can't do that yet. As soon
we go. Let's do a quick test, make sure that's all okay, because if it isn't, I'm talking myself.
Very
And I just want to say thank you for making it happen.
I lost my son.
Thank you.
They call it dead naming for a reason. So the reason it's called dead naming is because your son is dead.
My heart goes out to you.
Dead, killed by the woke mind virus. I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus.
Frankly, too much of a focus on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that.
As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. Entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions to defend our country from threats and invasion to the places from which they came. I am going to reinstate my level that remains in Mexico. Next, I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers to reduce disastrous to defeat what was record Pennsylvania field and assassins bullet ripped through my ear.
He's not in trouble for
Not get stunned though, bro. You're full on harassment for me. Not get stunned.
isn't it a pity? Now isn't it a shame how we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain? How we take each other's love without thinking anymore, forgetting to give back. Now isn't it a pity? And some things take so long, but how do I explain when not too many people can see we're all the same? And because of all their tears, their eyes can't hope to see the beauty that surrounds them. Now isn't it a pity? Isn't it a pity? Isn't it a shame how we break each other's hearts